17th February, 1937. Ego. The wife of the late president of the Theosophical Society and a resident of Adyar in Madras wanted to go to the root of the human ego, which is the cause of so much discord between nations, families, and individuals. She had a discussion with Bhagavan that went thus: what is the difference between the ego and the self? That which comes and goes, rises and sets, is born and dies, is the ego. That which always abides, never changes, and is devoid of qualities, is the self. Can I then say that God is the flame and we are the sparks? Although the sparks rise from the flame, they fall away from it into space, whereas we are never outside God. But is there a God apart from ourselves? Naturally, there must be a creator to this universe. If by ourselves you mean your body, then there is a creator. But if you mean the pure self, then there is nothing but self. If you objectify and see a universe, then you are bound to see many things beside yourself and then postulate a God as the creator. But body, God, and world rise and set together from and into the self. If God is apart from the self, then God would be selfless, that is, outside existence, and that means non-existent. I suppose one has to sublimate the ego self into the true self. The ego self does not exist at all. Then why does it give so much trouble? Look at the havoc it has created among nations and people. It is dreadful even to oneself. To whom is the trouble? The trouble also is imagined. Pain and pleasure are to the ego, which is itself imagined. When the ego disappears through constant self-inquiry into its nature, the illusion of pleasure and pain also disappears, and the self, their source, alone remains. There is neither ego nor ignorance in reality. But how did the ego arise? Ego is non-existent. Otherwise, you would be two instead of one. You, the ego, and you, the self. You are single, indivisible, and whole. Inquire into yourself, and the apparent ego and ignorance will disappear. Why then do we need to concentrate? Concentration, meditation, and all spiritual practices are not performed with the object of realizing the self, because the self is ever present. Instead, they are for realizing the non-existence of ignorance. Every man admits his own existence and does not need a mirror to prove it to him. Existence is awareness, which is the negation of ignorance. But then why does a man suffer? Only because he imagines himself other than what he is in reality. He feels he is the body, or this and that and the other. He thinks, I have a name, I am Gopal or Parashuram. In reality, he is the intelligent I am alone, stripped of qualities and superimpositions and of all names and forms. Does one see his body and all these qualities, shapes, and colors in dreamless sleep? Yet he does not deny that he is then himself existing even without a body. He must hold on to that existence, that being, even when he is in the waking state. The man of wisdom simply is. I am that I am. Sums up the whole truth. The method is summed up by be still and know that I am is God. What does stillness mean? Cessation of thinking, which is the universe of forms and colors, qualities and time, as well as space and all concepts. Another visitor asked, if the ego or I be an illusion, who then casts off the illusion? The I casts off the illusion of I, and yet remains as I. This appears to be a paradox to you. It is not so to the Jnani. Take the case of the Bhakta. His I prays to the Lord to unite it with him, which is its surrender. What remains as residuum after this surrender is the eternal I, which is God the Absolute, or Param Atman, which is himself. What has happened to the I, which originally prayed? Being unreal, it simply vanished. 18th November, 1936. A visitor asked, Sushupti is so peaceful that one would love to stay as long as possible in deep sleep, but cannot. Why? We are ever in Sushupti. Becoming aware of it in the waking state is samadhi. But the ignorant one, the ayani, cannot remain long in Sushupti because his ego pushes him out of it. The jnani, although he has scorched the ego, it continues to rise again and again due to prarabdha karma. So for both the jnani and the ignorant one, the ayani, the ego springs up, but with this difference. Whereas the jnanis enjoy the transcendental experience, keeping it aim and attention always fixed on its source, that of the ayani, or ignorant one, is completely ignorant of it. The yoni is not harmful, being a mere skeleton of its normal self, like a burnt-up rope. By constantly fixing its attention on the source, the heart, the ego gets dissolved into it like a salt doll which has fallen into the ocean. March 14th, 1943. Professor M. Venkateramaya, later known as Swami Ramananda Saraswati, asked whether the light which gives the aham, or I sense, identity and knowledge of the world is ignorance or pure consciousness. And Sri Bhagavan replied, "It is only the reflected light of pure consciousness, Chit, that makes the I believe itself different from others and create the objects. For reflection, there must be a surface on which the reflection takes place." Ella Melier, a Swiss woman, asked, "What is that surface?" On realization of the self, you will find that the reflection and the surface on which it takes place do not actually exist, but that both of them are one and the same pure consciousness. There is the world, which requires location for its existence and light to make it perceptible. Both rise simultaneously. Therefore, physical existence and perception depend upon the light of the mind, which is reflected from the self. Just as cinematographic pictures can be made visible by a reflected light, and only in darkness, so also the world pictures are perceptible only by the light of the self when reflected in the darkness of ignorance. The world can be seen neither in the utter darkness of ignorance, as in deep sleep, nor in the utter light of the self, as in self-realization or samadhi.